yesterday I graduated high school. Although when I looked at the calendar and I realized it's been like 34 years since I graduated high school. It's been a really long time, but it reminds me of high school, and so I was going to challenge you guys to think back to high school, maybe think back even further in your lives. I want you to think back maybe to elementary school or middle school, and I want you to think about maybe it's Christmas time, and there's that one gift, like there's that one toy that you're desperate for, and that you're dying to have, and your friends have it, and you want it. Can you think of what it might be? Depending on what age you are. I remember, like when I was a kid. It just jumped out of my head. What was the Cabbage Patch Kids were huge for a while. Atari video games when I was a kid were a big thing. Everybody wanted it, but for me, one of the things that I really wanted, I got to put one of these down. One of the things that I really wanted was now technology is small, right? Everything is on your phone. Back in the day, technology was getting bigger and bigger, and so what I think it was my confirmation, it wasn't Christmas, and I so desperately wanted a boombox. You guys remember what those were? A boombox, the big, huge radios, and I can remember the feeling of like my friend over there has one, I want one so badly, like I need this thing, I have to have it. And I got it for my confirmation, so I was so excited. There it is, right there. Yep. So that is my Lasonic. I've never heard of the brand, but Lasonic boombox, and I was thrilled with that thing to pump out my '80s, rap music, and it was such a joy to get. Man, look at that. Yes, that was a thrill. But we all know that feeling. I think we all know to one extent or another that feeling of like just desperately wanting something, wanting it so bad, like, oh my goodness, if I don't get this gift, if I don't get this toy, it's never going to be the same because my friends have it and I want it. But we also have that feeling of desperation, I think, in our lives at times. Now, we have prayers of desperation, don't we? We have, there's things in our lives that are wants, like, oh man, I'd really like to see that happen, or that'd be so cool if that happened. But there's other prayers, I think, that we all have that are just desperate prayers, that we cry out to God so with everything that we have, like a little kid desperate for a boombox, but even more so, like, Lord, I need your work in my life. I need you to rescue my marriage. I need you to rescue, I need a job. I was just fired. I need a job, or I lost my job. I need a job. Maybe as parents, desperate for our kids to be well and safe and make it in life. I think we all know that feeling of desperation. And also, maybe along with that is that feeling, or maybe even just praying for physical healing for somebody who's sick or ill. I think we all know that to one extent or another. We also know the feeling of maybe like the kid who's like, well, my friends have this gift, this toy. Why don't I have it? We can have that feeling at times too, as we desperately cry out to God. I need this thing. I don't just want it. I need it. And feeling like maybe it's not answered. Where is it? Where are you, God? Why? Why am I having to wait for this thing? Why? We want to talk about this desperate prayer today. And what we're going to do as we do it is obviously we're going to continue our series that we've been called Encountering Jesus. And so we see in the Bible again and again Jesus encountering people. And when he does, their lives are changed forever. You really cannot encounter Jesus in any kind of real meaningful way and not have your lives changed forever. So we're going to look at some people that Jesus had encounters with and see what we can learn from them. Because the good news is that we can encounter, because Jesus is our living Lord and Savior, we can have encounters with him again and again and again. And so for many of us, we've had an initial encounter with Jesus. We've come to know him as a person, as our Lord and our Savior, the one who has taken away our sins and given us new life. And that's a real encounter, right? 2 Corinthians 5:17, right? Whoever's in Christ is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. When we encounter Jesus for that first time, we are brand spanking new. But it doesn't end there. Again and again, each day we wake up, each Sunday we come to church, like we have an opportunity to encounter Jesus again, to see him work in different areas of our lives. And so this morning we want to read another account and look at another account of Jesus encountering somebody with his presence and the way that he met them. And so what we want to do is tie that into this feeling of desperation of prayer, and maybe even feeling like, where is it and why isn't it happening? So what we're going to do then is continue this series, and today so last week we looked at, oh gosh, I didn't write it down. Last week's topic was Jesus Restores? Oh my goodness, you think I would know. But last week was Jesus Restores. Today we're going to look at, wow, I should have wrote that down. Today we're going to look at the idea that Jesus responds. That when we have an encounter with Jesus, that Jesus responds. And so what I'd like to do, just as a little illustration, we're going to kind of carry this out as we go, and we talked about that desperate prayer. So what I want you to do, just as a little visual illustration, is if you would take that desperate prayer, because I think most of us have them, that thing you're desperate to see God change and move and make different in your life, if you could just maybe visually put it in the cup. So you're going to put your desperate prayer in this cup. And I'm going to leave this cup right here. We're going to refer to it in just a minute again. So your desperate prayers are in that cup. Just visual, that's all. Just a visual aid. But we're going to do that, so they're not actually in there, but we're going to visually aid it. And so what we're going to do now is turn to John, the Gospel of John, chapter 11. So the Gospel of John, chapter 11. I'm going to read this whole account of the death of Lazarus. So we'll read through the whole account, and then we'll kind of go back through and highlight a few verses and see a few things that we can learn. Things that I believe when you're in that place of desperation that will bring you hope and bring you life to it. And so chapter 11 starts this way. It says, "Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent him, saying, 'Lord, he whom you love is ill.' But when Jesus heard of it, he said, 'This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it.'" Great line. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then, after this, he said to his disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? They were ready to kill you when you were there last time. You want to go back?" And Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him." After saying these things, he said to them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he'll recover." Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant he was taking a rest in sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus has died, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for about 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask for from God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard of it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were there with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary quickly ran out, and they followed her. supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. And the shortest verse in the Bible, verse 35 here, Jesus wept. So the Jews said, see how much he loved him? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believe, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The man who had died came out, and his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Great story. So amazing. And so in this story, what do we have? I mean, we've got two sisters, desperate for their brother who is ill. It's a family, by the way, who was close to Jesus, who knew Jesus personally. You know, they were like extended family. Jesus loved them. He would eat at their house when he was nearby. I mean, they were tight. And so they've got a brother who's ill, and they're afraid that he is on the brink of death. And so they call out to their friend Jesus, who they know has healed other people, who they know can heal their brother. And so they get word to Jesus, Lazarus is sick, come right away. Now, of course, they don't say come right away, but it's implicit there. Jesus, he's sick, you need to get here now. And so what does Jesus do when he gets the message? Nothing at first. Jesus does nothing for a number of days, and when he finally gets there, Lazarus was already dead. Now, spoiler alert, we know how it ends. He's going to be resurrected. But at this point, the family has no idea how it's going to turn out, how it's going to go, where Jesus is, even if he got the message. And so how does a story like this intersect with our own lives today? What can this encounter teach us about Jesus and about us? As I said, that there's three things I hope to point out here quickly, that in our desperation, Jesus does something. And the first thing we're going to look at is that Jesus responds, but Jesus has a different schedule. And so we cry out to Jesus for rescue, and in desperation, Jesus responds, but he tends to have very often a different schedule than us. And so if you look at verses 5 through 7 there, it reminds us, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, what does he do? Does he run right away to go see them? No, it says he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to his disciples, let's go down there and do something about it. And one of his best friends is deathly sick, and he stays where he's at. He performed miracles for others. Why wouldn't he do it for us? I'm sure the sisters are asking. Have you ever felt that way? Like the little kid who says, oh, my friends have that toy. I want it too. Have you ever felt that way in your desperate prayers? It's like, God, I see you seemingly answer prayers in other people's lives all the time. Where are you in my desperation? Where are you where I'm at? Why are you not moving? And so it said, that it probably took the messenger about a day to get from where Mary and Martha were to where Jesus was. It says he stayed 2 more days, and then it took him a day to get back again, about 4 days before he actually responds. And you can imagine the struggle for Mary and Martha during those 4 days. Did Jesus get the message? Did the messenger get to him? Does he even know? Did he hear it? Does he not care? These things kind of come to our minds when we struggle, when we wait, when we don't see the things we so desperately want. Do you not hear? Do you not care? It's exactly, I'm sure, what they're feeling. Why are you taking so long? That line, that verse 5 to me is so powerful, where it says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. The gospel writer John reminds us that Jesus did genuinely love these sisters and their brother. It was an important reminder showing that the testing of their faith, this delay, was not a denial of his love. And so the first thing I think we need to recognize too is as Jesus is on a different schedule is that as we wait, when it seems like he's not responding, that it's not a denial of his love, that he is there with you, that he cares for you, that he sees you and knows you and loves you. It was simply that Jesus is often on a different schedule. So often we're running and Jesus is walking. We go at our own pace, our own schedule. We want what we want, when we want it, how we want it. And Jesus just doesn't operate that way all the time. He does not operate on our predetermined schedule. And so when we look at the cup and we say, Jesus, don't you see the things that I put in there, how big it is, how difficult it is, how desperately I'm crying out, why won't you do anything about it? He's saying, I see it, and I know it, and I love you. And even if you don't see it, I am at work. So what takes so long, Jesus? There's a truth, I think, that we kind of need to get into our head, right? That things rarely happen at the pace I want them to happen at, right? When we're dealing with Jesus, things rarely happen at the pace we want them to happen at. This is what trusting God is all about. This is called maturity. If you've been a parent, or you've been in a grocery store, you know the little kid who's like screaming and crying that they want the item they want the candy that's there. They're screaming and crying. They want it, and they want it now. Right? Parents, you remember that, right? I don't miss those days, right? When you think everybody's looking at you because your kid's going nuts because they want this thing and you got to tell them no. We want what we want. But as we mature, we learn that sometimes we have to wait. The parent at the grocery store knows better. The parent at the grocery store knows that, or our kids would always be like, hey, can you I want this and I want this. Be like, Christmas is a month away. Like, just wait, Like, the parent knows why they're not giving it to the child. The kid doesn't see it. And so one of the things about maturity, as we mature in our relationship with Jesus and our faith in him, we recognize that he knows best. And we recognize often that there's strength and there's learning in the waiting. Romans 12:12, what does Paul say in Romans 12:12? He says, rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, constant in prayer. There's something about being patient in the waiting that builds our faith. It's an evidence of faith, but it also builds our faith. So maturity says, I have faith in Jesus that he will deliver in his timing, and I trust him. Maturity says that I trust Jesus and I trust him to work in his timing, not mine. It's not easy. Let me tell you, it's not easy. The waiting is not easy, but following Jesus means that we walk at his pace and not ours. Like throughout the gospel again and again, we see Jesus like walking at his own pace. Like there's 3 times, and for sake of, I'll just do it quick. So Lazarus, he died. They're like, come rescue him. Like he's sick, he waits. The wedding at Cana, his mother's like, hey, there's no more wine. You need to do something, and Jesus doesn't do it right away, right? There was a time where his brothers were saying, hey, you're going to come up to the Passover festival in Jerusalem? He goes, nope, this is not my time. I'm not going to go right now. Each of the cases, he always responds. He comes to Lazarus. He turns water into wine. He ends up at the festival, but it's on his timing, not the timing of those who are around him. When we expect immediate answers, we're going to be frustrated much of the time. When we want immediate answers, we're going to be frustrated so much of the time. We should be expecting for Jesus to move, but on his schedule, not ours. And so we see that Jesus has a different schedule, but we also see Jesus has a different reality. Jesus has a completely different reality, and his is much bigger than ours. So whatever you put in that cup is big to you. It is huge. It is desperate. But the reality of Jesus is bigger than whatever you put in that cup. Jesus is bigger. Let's look at verses 20 through 26. And so it says that, so when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained at the house. Martha says to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have not died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said, I know. He'll rise again at the general resurrection. At the end of the days, sometime in the future, he'll rise again. I know. Jesus said to her, no. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Such an honest conversation with Martha. Lord, if you had been here, if only you had been here. She thought it was too late. She thought it was too late for her prayer, that there was now no more hope for her. And so he has this conversation about resurrection with her. And she's, again, it's an honest, yes, I get it. In the end of the days, when God returns and he makes all things right and new, there'll be a resurrection. And he'll be resurrected then. But Jesus, rather than one day in the future in heaven, Jesus is saying, no, now. Something big is going to happen now. Jesus had a completely different view of eternity. One day, we believe that we're going to be with Jesus. But Jesus says that eternity happens now when we have an encounter with Jesus. When we step into faith in Jesus, the future begins now. Jesus steps into our lives and makes a difference. So does having a relationship with Jesus affect my life now? It's one thing, I feel like, it's one thing to look, in terms of our relationship with Jesus, it's one thing to look back and say, yes, my sins are forgiven. Jesus has died on the cross for me. It's another thing to think, yes, when I die, I will be in heaven with Jesus. I will be with him for eternity. But let's not miss the middle part, is that Jesus is with us here and now to make it different, that his view of what's going on is completely different, that I am in your life, that I am working, that I am here. But my view is a different view from yours. I feel like sometimes, I've heard this saying with sports analogies, it's like when there's a really good athlete, Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky, I'm dating myself again, but they say he's playing checkers and everybody else is playing chess, right? That athlete is so good, he's just playing at a completely different level. And it's kind of the same way as we deal with God, as we press into Jesus, is that his perspective is so completely different than ours, that just because it's not looking like we want it to look, it doesn't mean that he's not at work. That he knows better, that he knows what's going on. He knows that this death of Lazarus at this time was actually good because it was going to point and glorify God and Jesus. He knew. And so when we cry out to God, even when it doesn't look the way we hoped it would look, faith and trust says that I know that something bigger is going on, that I'm going to trust you, even though it doesn't look well, even though it doesn't look right, even though it doesn't look the way I thought it would or I hoped it would. We believe that there's just a different reality going on, that God is at work even when it doesn't look like he is. So Jesus has a different schedule, Jesus has a different reality, but Jesus also has a different solution. And I love this last part. Jesus has a different solution to this whole situation with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. He has a different solution to our prayers that we cry out to. And his solution involves us. The great part of the Christian life is that we don't walk it out alone. We have others to walk it out with us. That's what I was just hinting at, how important this prayer for the graduates are. That we don't, as parents, just send our kids off to college on their own. That we have a community that we know that is there with us to encourage us, to encourage them, to pray for them. Right? Faith in Jesus is not meant to be a Lone Ranger thing. It's meant to be lived out with others who are doing the same thing. Right? And that's part of the plan, part of God's plan. He calls us out of the world and into relationship with himself and others. And so look at this at the very end here, verse 39, where it says, Jesus says, take the stone away. Martha, the sister of the dead man, says to him, Lord, by this time there's going to be an odor. In the King James, by the way, it says, he stinketh, which is just a great little line. I love it. He stinketh. But there's going to be she still doesn't get what's going to happen here. She still doesn't understand what Jesus has been saying. And Jesus said, didn't I tell you, if you believed me, right, you're going to see the glory of God. They take away the stone. Jesus gives this prayer to the Father. I know you hear me anyway, but I say this on account of these guys. Lazarus come out. He comes out and says, the man who died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with a cloth. And this last sentence is what we're going to highlight. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Unbind him and let him go. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. I want to focus on that last. Jesus said to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 words from Jesus to go. I want to highlight one of those words that's important to us. And if I asked you, it would probably take you 5 or 6 guesses. Which word do you think we're going to highlight? No, just one word. Just one word. Unbind, not unbind. I don't want to put it too long. It's hard. Them. Them is the word that I want to highlight here that's important. Them is so key here. We could skip over it, right? Them. Jesus invites the people who are there to take part in what God is doing. God prays. Jesus prays. God does a miracle. Jesus does what only God can do, and then he invites the people that are part of the crowd, the loved ones who loved Mary and Martha, the community around them, to take part in it, to go to Lazarus, to take the wrappings off of him. There was something important for them to be part of this miracle, for them to have their hands in the midst of it. God does what he can only do, and he invites us to do what we can do. There's an important community aspect of the way that God moves in our midst. There's an important community aspect to the way that our desperate prayers are answered, and we lose it. We could skip over it so easily. Nobody lives this Christian life alone. We are really, there's a sign outside the men's bathroom in that little lobby over there that says, better together. I believe that so much, that we are better together. That we are better. I just said this at a class the other day, that we are better because you are here, and you are here, and you are here. We are better as a community because you are here. Because together we get to support and encourage each other, to pray for each other. God has created us to fight not with one another, but to fight for one another. There was something in this, the physical coming alongside the family, that benefited all of them. And so when we come together, we can say things like, I know things are hard right now, but I am with you. I know you're desperate right now, but I am here. I know you've been waiting, but I am here praying for you, rooting you on, supporting you, crying with you, right? I'll pray for you and you pray for me. There's something in the way that God answers our prayers, even our desperate prayers, that is very often answered by the person next to you. The person who calls you up on the phone and checks in on you, the person who drops off a meal when you needed it. I can't tell you how many times I've heard stories like that, it just happened. I don't know. This person just showed up and they didn't know I needed something, and yet they did. Like, God answers prayers through you. And so as you live your life with Jesus, as you're led by the Spirit, listen to what ways he may be calling you to bless the others. You know, by the way, too, that God meets us in our own afflictions and brings peace to us and heals us and gets us through it. So why? So that we can then help others who are going through the same thing. There's a community aspect to God answering our desperate prayers. We're in this battle together, right? To look to the one next to you and say, you are not going to go through this alone. This is the power, not just of a family, like a blood family that goes through things alone. This is the power of a community, of a church family that says you don't need to go through this together. That's why we always try to say that we're not just people who happen to be in the same room on a Sunday, that we're connected in a different way. It's why we try to do things like our Connect class, which, by the way, is coming up soon, right? Wednesday, the 17th of this month, we're going to have a Connect class, right? The class of, like, how do I get involved with what's going on here at the Vineyard? How do I join the family and be part of what's going on? Check your calendars for that if you haven't taken that class. But it's why we do so much what we do. We recognize walking out this life of faith is not always easy. God uses the community to answer prayers so very often.